In the summer of 1858, London had a problem so disgusting that politicians finally decided to fix it. Not because people were dying, not because doctors were warning them, not because the poor had been begging for cleaner streets and safer water for years, but because the smell reached Parliament. For decades, London had been dumping human waste directly into the River Thames, the same river that ran through the heart of the city. The same river people crossed every day, the same river that supplied drinking water to parts of London. And by the summer of 1858, during a brutal heat wave, that river became less like water and more like a giant open sewer. The smell was so foul that curtains inside Parliament were reportedly soaked in chemicals to try to block it. The stench rolled off the Thames and into the halls of power, and suddenly the people in charge could no longer ignore what ordinary Londoners had been living with for years. This became known as the Great Stink. And as ridiculous as the name sounds, the story behind it is much darker, because this was not just a bad smell. It was the smell of a city that had outgrown itself, a city that had filled itself with people, waste, disease, and denial. And for years, everyone kept acting like the problem could simply be flushed away. But the truth was much stranger. The more London tried to clean itself, the more poison it sent into the river. To understand how this happened, you have to imagine London before modern sewers. By the 1800s, the city was exploding in size. More people, more houses, more factories, more horses, more waste. And every day, London produced an unbelievable amount of filth. Human waste, animal waste, rotting food, industrial chemicals, butcher scraps, dead animals, dirty water, everything a massive city wanted to get rid of. For a long time, much of that waste collected in cesspits beneath homes, out of sight, out of mind, at least until the pits filled up, leaked, overflowed, or poisoned the ground around them. Then came one of the great symbols of modern comfort, the flushing toilet. It sounded like progress. Instead of waste sitting under your house, you could flush it away with water. Clean, easy, modern. But here's where the story turns. Because those new flushing toilets did not send the waste to some magical treatment plant. They sent it into old drains. And many of those drains led straight to the Thames. So Londoners thought they were making their homes cleaner. But really, they were moving the filth from under the floor into the river. The private problem became a public disaster. The city had not destroyed the waste. It had concentrated it, and then it ran that waste through the middle of London. This is one of the strangest parts of the Great Stink. The crisis was partly created by progress. A new invention made individual homes feel cleaner while making the city as a whole more dangerous. Everyone could flush, everyone could look away, and the river carried the evidence. At first, the Thames could almost hide it. A big river has a way of making people believe things disappear. Throw something in, watch it drift, problem solved, but nothing really disappeared. The waste mixed, settled, rotted, built up, and during the hot summer of 1858, the river exposed the truth. The heat cooked the sewage, the water level dropped, the sludge along the banks thickened, and the smell became impossible to ignore. Imagine walking near the river and being hit by it. Not a normal bad smell, not garbage, not a farm, not a dirty alley. A massive, heavy, rotting stink rising from human waste baking in the sun. A smell so thick it seemed to become part of the air. People covered their faces. Businesses suffered. The wealthy complained. Newspapers mocked the city. And inside Parliament, the smell became personal. That is when the government moved. Not after the first warnings, not after years of sickness, not after the poor suffered beside polluted water, after the stink reached the people with power. And that is the uncomfortable truth at the center of this story. Sometimes history does not change when people are suffering. It changes when powerful people are inconvenienced. But to understand why London was so terrified, we have to talk about disease. In the 1800s, London had suffered repeated cholera outbreaks. Cholera could tear through a neighborhood with terrifying speed. A person could seem normal one day and be dead soon after. Families were destroyed, streets were emptied, fear moved from house to house. But many people still did not understand how cholera spread. The dominant belief was called miasma theory. The idea that disease came from bad air, rotten smells, poisonous vapors, foulness floating through the streets. So when the Thames began to stink, many Londoners thought the smell itself might be deadly. And in a strange way, they were wrong, but also close to the truth. The smell was not the main cause of cholera. The water was. The danger was not just breathing near the river. It was drinking water contaminated with human waste. That is what makes this story so disturbing. London was terrified of the smell coming out of the river, while the deadlier threat was often what people were putting into their bodies. Clear water could be dangerous, a normal cup could be deadly, and the city's sewage problem was not just offensive, it was intimate. It entered homes and it entered kitchens, it entered children, it entered the body before anyone understood what was happening. One of the people who helped uncover this was Dr. John Snow. Years before the Great Stink, he investigated a deadly cholera outbreak in Soho and traced many cases to a contaminated water pump on Broad Street. His work challenged the idea that cholera came from bad air, but ideas do not always win immediately just because they are right. Many people still clung to the belief that stink caused disease. So London kept arguing, kept delaying, it kept patching things, kept flushing waste into the Thames, until the river itself became an accusation. By 1858, the Thames was basically saying what reformers had been saying for years. You cannot keep doing this. You cannot build a modern city on top of filth and call it progress. You cannot flush a problem away if away means into your drinking water. And you cannot ignore the underside of civilization forever. The man who became central to solving the crisis was Joseph Bazalgette. He was an engineer, and his solution was not glamorous. It was not poetic. It was not the kind of thing people usually celebrate in history books. He wanted to build a massive sewer system, huge tunnels, interception sewers, pumping stations, and embankments, a hidden network that would capture London's waste and carry it away from the city before releasing it farther downstream. In other words, he wanted to redesign the invisible body of London. Because a city is not just buildings, streets, and monuments. A city has organs, it has circulation, it has intake, and it has output. And if the waste system fails, the whole body gets sick. Bazalgette understood something simple and profound. London did not just need cleaner streets, it needed a new underground reality. So after years of debate, the Great Stink finally forced action. Parliament approved the work, and London began building one of the most important sanitation projects in history. Miles of sewers were constructed, brick by brick, tunnel by tunnel, beneath the streets, behind the scenes, under the feet of people who wanted the city to feel normal again. And once the system was completed, it changed London. It did not solve every problem overnight, but it transformed public health. It reduced the city's dependence on cesspits. It moved sewage out of the central Thames. It helped make modern London possible. And yet, most people walking above those tunnels probably never thought about them. That is the strange thing about infrastructure. When it works, it becomes invisible. Nobody praises the sewer when the street smells fine. Nobody thanks the pipe when the toilet flushes. Nobody thinks about the engineer when the river does not stink. But when it fails, nothing else matters, and not politics, and not manners, and not wealth, not architecture, and not empire. All the grand ideas of civilization can be brought to a stop by human waste in the wrong place. That is what the Great Stink revealed. London was the capital of an empire, a center of finance, power, science, and culture. And yet, in 1858, it was humbled by its own sewage. The city had palaces, churches, newspapers, gentlemen's clubs, and Parliament itself. But beneath all of that was a basic biological truth. People produce waste. And if a society does not respect that truth, eventually the truth rises. Sometimes through the drains, sometimes into the river, sometimes straight through the windows of Parliament. That may be the most absurd part of the story. The smell had to reach the lawmakers before the law moved fast enough. The poor had been close to the problem for years. The sick had paid the price. The river had carried the evidence. But the turning point came when the people in power could no longer sit comfortably in their own building. And maybe that is why this story still feels modern, because we still do this. We still hide problems until they become impossible to ignore. We still enjoy convenience without asking where the waste goes. We still treat infrastructure as boring until it breaks. We still wait for a crisis to become visible to the right people. The Great Stink sounds funny. It sounds like a joke from history, a city so smelly it scared Parliament into building sewers. But underneath the ridiculous name is something serious. It is a story about denial, about bad science, and about class, and about public health, about how a city can be brilliant and filthy at the same time, and about how progress can create new disasters when nobody thinks about the system underneath it. By the end of the century, London had changed. The sewers were built, the Thames began its long recovery, and the Great Stink became a strange historical memory. A disgusting summer when the river turned against the city. But the lesson remained. Civilization is not just what people build upward, it is what they build underneath. The grandest city in the world can still be defeated by the things it refuses to handle. And in the summer of 1858, London learned that lesson in the most humiliating way possible. Not through a speech, not through a battle, not through a revolution, but through a smell so powerful that it drifted off the Thames, entered the halls of Parliament, and forced one of the world's greatest cities to finally admit what everyone else had been smelling for years. London was drowning in its own waste, and pretending not to notice was no longer an option.